Well, 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 here we are in person. Just like the Oscars tonight. I never thought of the Willows as a thought leader, but we're live and in person before they are. So it's just so great to see you all. It's fun to see some former residents, many current residents, many friends, and a couple of future residents. So good to see you all here. Before we go any further, how many of you know what a hearing loop is? Well, a hearing loop is a technology that broadcasts the sound from the microphones directly into your hearing aids if you have what's called, if you have a T-coil in your hearing aids. I don't mean to start the meeting off with this so uninspiring comment about hearing aid technology, but if you have a T-coil, I'm told that you'll know how to tune it in so that you'll hear everything that comes out of the microphones here directly in your hearing aid. Okay, enough about that. That's not very inspiring. Here's our agenda for the meeting. So I'm welcoming you, obviously, and then I'll turn the meeting over to Rich Clark, our board chair, who will provide us with the readings, and then he will introduce the other board members. And then after that, Doug Yeoman, our board treasurer, will give you a brief overview, and then Esteban will give you a more detailed overview of our budget. I'll give a brief executive director report, and then we'll go right into the program from there. So thank you again for joining us. It's just great to have you all here. Rich, you're up.
Thank you, Todd. It is just great to see everybody here. And cannot hear me?
Yeah, you got to speak.
How's that? Better?
Yeah.
You may regret having to hear me. But it is just great to see everybody in person, as Todd said, and as well as we have probably, what, a couple of hundred people out there on Zoom. So that is just wonderful. Okay, well, let me just start with some readings here. This is from Colossians. Let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also ye are called in one body, and be ye thankful. From Matthew, ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. And from Psalms, behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious ointment upon the head that ran down upon the beard, and even Aaron's beard then went down to the skirts of his garment. And then from Miscellany, may the divine light of Christian Science that lighteth every enlightened thought illumine your faith and understanding, exclude all darkness or doubt, and signal the perfect path wherein to walk, the perfect principle whereby to demonstrate the perfect man and the perfect law of God. Also from Miscellany, today my soul can only sing and soar. An increasing sense of God's love, omnipresence, and omnipotence enfolds me. Each day I know him nearer, love him more, and humbly pray to serve him better. And from Pulpit and Press, divine presence, breathe thou thy blessing on every heart in this house. And finally, hymn number 227, aptly called Home, the second and third verses. For thou, within no walls confined, dwellest with them of humble mind. Such ever bring thee where they come, and where thou art, they find their home. Here we may prove the power of prayer to strengthen faith and sweeten care, to teach our faint desires to rise and bring all heaven before our eyes. So thank you. All right, now I'd like to introduce members of the board, and if each one of you would just kind of stand up, and we'll save the applause for the end. I know it's going to be tough to do that, but so Ann Pendleton, Vice Chair from La Quinta, California. Good, thank you. All right. Doug Yeoman, Treasurer from Irvine. And then John Bryant, Secretary from Los Alamitos. John. Susie Bates from Sunnyvale. Doreen Ford, Laguna Niguel. Dick Richard Davenport, Baldwin, Missouri. And our newest board member, Dave Cook from here. And I'm Rich Clark, Chairman of the board from Newburyport, Massachusetts, a delightful little town about 40 miles north of Boston, and you all are welcome there anytime. So you have wonderful weather here. So yeah, for the board. Well, I have just a few comments about 2021. And as you know, it did bring some challenges with COVID and the changing protocols and guidelines, but your response was outstanding. You cheerfully and willingly worked with our staff in responding to these changes, and the board greatly appreciates your flexibility and cooperation throughout the year. So they really do appreciate it. And I think there's a light at the end of that tunnel, so that's great. We have loved Dave Cook, working with him and the Residents Association, and we are very grateful for their support over the past year. Thank you, David. Just want to you and the Residents Association recognition. And Todd, on behalf of the board, we also want to thank you and the entire staff. They have touched everyone with joy, dedication, everything you could possibly imagine, just lots of love. And they've blessed, I think, everybody they've touched. I just can't believe otherwise. So thank you. So it's been a while since we met in person, so I thought I'd just give you a little bit of some update. And I'm not going to steal any of Todd's thunder because he'll probably have his way with me later, so I have to be careful. So right now, our occupancy is at 84%, which is the highest it's been since 2019, which is really terrific. And I have to say, we have new residents coming in from some states that we've never had folks come in before. I think Idaho, maybe Texas, and I think one other one, Washington. So those are some new states. We also have folks coming from Cyprus and Japan, which is the first time we've had any folks from those faraway countries. But the fact is our awareness is growing, and that is great news. So we've got very good commitments here for the next year. I think we've got at least 4 in the hopper, which would take residency up this year to close to probably close to 90%. So that is all very good news. So we just want to thank you for getting the word out. And then the other thing I want to mention here, finally, and financially speaking, we're going into 2022 stronger than we've ever been before. And this is really good in terms of reserves to build long-term sustainability and for any contingencies that may come along. So that is really good news, and we're grateful for that. So let me just say this other thing. Looking forward, there is much to look forward to. And yes, the Willows is a thriving, vibrant, sound, spiritually minded community. But most importantly, the board is grateful for you, the residents who choose to live here and make it your home. So thank you on behalf of the board. We're just very grateful. Now, I'd like to introduce board member Doug, treasurer, and Director of Finance, Esteban Acuna. Esteban?
Thank you, Rich, and good afternoon, everyone. Rich said he wasn't going to take all the thunder, but he obviously took some of it.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'll begin with a quote from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy, which you can find on page 206. In the scientific relation of God to man, we find that whatever blesses one blesses all. As Jesus showed with the loaves and the fishes, spirit, not matter, being the source of supply. As we continue to grow as the community and as individuals, we strive to make sure that our financial stability, sustainability, and supply are guided by God and His abundant provision. We strongly rely on God's everlasting consciousness to make every decision that will benefit the Willows today and for generations to come. During the last fiscal year and beyond, a considerable amount of God's supply has taken the form of very generous donations. Even though the material picture seemed challenging and the shutdowns continued to happen, our community's generosity played a large part in our operations. I must say that these generous donations were not only given in the form of dollars, but also in the form of prayer, time, adaptability, and compliance with the local, state, and federal regulations. I'd like to thank all of you for your kindness and generosity towards our community. One of our main objectives for the past fiscal year was to allocate funds to ensure sustainable growth in our occupancy rate while maintaining and improving our property for the well-being of our residents. And this is something Rich already said, but I'll say it again. I am proud to say that these efforts have flourished into the community you see here today. We have raised our occupancy rate from 80% at the beginning of last fiscal year to 84% today. And we continue to see an increase in demand for our beautifully renovated garden villas. On the property side, we were able to allocate funds towards the improvement of our garden villas by focusing on replacing numerous HVAC systems and repiping them. This will ensure future functionality of these villas for our current and future residents. We are excited to continue taking steps towards sustainable upward progress, where we are conscious of the needs and wants of our residents, staff, and neighbors. On behalf of the board, thank you all for your support and contributions to the Willows community to carry our mission forward. We look forward to carrying it forward for many years to come. Now, I'll turn it over to Esteban, our current finance manager and future director of finance and administration, to discuss the finances in a bit more detail. Esteban.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Douglas. The next few slides provide an overview of the financial statements from the past fiscal year compared to the year before, and I'll highlight the key points. During the last fiscal year, our main financial focus was staying afloat while navigating the turbulent waters of the world pandemic. We learned from the year before that the world wasn't the same, and we had to adapt to the circumstances. As we designed the budget for fiscal year 2021, our main focus was to allocate funds strategically that will allow us to break even for the year. When the budget was being created, we already knew the pandemic was going to play a big role in all of our activities. One of the biggest constraints was the supply chain problems that the US port regulations caused all over the country. As raw materials became scarce, this drove prices up, therefore creating a highly priced market for contractors of all sorts. So we decided to decrease the budget for garden villa renovations and turnovers. As you can see highlighted in yellow, This method drove up our cash reserves and maintained our fixed assets at the same level. It also helped decrease our spending and helped us focus on improving our revenue streams while maintaining our property. One of last year's many blessings were the fantastic investment gains we experienced, especially in the last 2 quarters of the fiscal year. The line highlighted in green shows the increased value of our investment portfolio by almost 22%. This is great. We're extremely grateful for that, as these gains will serve our community well in the future. At the end of the year, we were amazed with the positive financial results. As I mentioned before, we planned just to break even, but instead, we achieved a very healthy surplus. Highlighted in yellow, you can see our rental income stayed pretty much the same. Considering it's mostly fixed, it was a blessing to rely on our community to continue to support us during these tough times. In addition, our total expenses, highlighted in green, stayed around the same. This was a huge accomplishment for our directors and managers. I say this with admiration, as we saw them meticulously and strategically managing their departmental budgets with success, especially during an inflationary period. As Doug mentioned before, this year came with unexpected abundance, or divinely expected, I should say. Donations played a big role in the last year's incomes and allowed us to operate with the security and confidence that we needed to succeed in our plans and overcome any adversity along the way. Our appreciation for our donors extends beyond a million words of gratitude. Thank you. We found so much joy taking care of our residents and our staff, making sure they felt protected and supported. We dedicated considerable resources to make sure we were not only complying with the local, state, and federal regulations, but to create an environment of proactive safety. I would like to thank all of our residents, employees, and guests for uplifting the spiritual atmosphere of our community and for your patience during this process. Lastly, a key component that made our fiscal year 2021 so successful was the constant striving from our administration to find alternative solutions and applications that become useful during times of adversity. These are shown in the other income row, highlighted in light blue. What I mean by this is the result of tons of paperwork that our admin had to go through to get us the Payroll Protection Plan loan, also known as the PPP loan, that was later forgiven by the government, converted into a grant, and the Employee Retention Tax Credit, also known as the ERTC, which allowed us to recover a considerable amount of money that we spent on taxes. All of the above demonstrations resulted in a net profit of $888,000. I know, right? Overall, we're a financially healthy organization, and we expect that to continue for many years to come, so that you and your family can further enjoy life at the Willows. Now I'll pass this back to Todd Herser for his Executive Director report. Thank you very much.
All right. Normally, the executive director presentation focuses on various projects around the campus and the community. But today I'm going to keep my remarks brief so that we can have more time with our guest speakers. Plus, I want to focus on a particular single idea. Someone asked me recently, what matters most at the Willows? What a great question, and what a thought-provoking question. I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and then I came across this citation from Mrs. Eddy, in her 1901 message to the Mother Church. And she uses the term tender care. She wrote, "After a hard and successful career, reformers usually are handsomely provided for. Has the thought come to Christian Scientists, have we housed, fed, clothed, or visited a reformer for that purpose? Have we looked after or even known of his sore necessities? Gifts he needs not. God has provided the means for him while he was providing ways and means for others. But mortals in the advancing stages of their careers need the watchful and tender care of those who want to help them. The aged reformer should not be left to the mercy of those who are not glad to sacrifice for him, even as he has sacrificed for others all the best of his earthly years." Is there anything more important than adopting the practice of daily tender care? Think about what Mrs. Eddy's guidance says in light of our mission here at the Willows, which is to nurture a grace-led community of compassionate and forward-thinking Christian Scientists dedicated to spiritual growth and service. Let me read that portion of Mrs. Eddy's statement again. But mortals in the advancing stages of their careers need the watchful and tender care of those who want to help them. We all know the Willows is not a care facility. However, we are a community that cares. We care deeply about our residents and our employees. We want our employees to feel valued and cherished for their contributions to the Willows. And we want our residents to feel that we cherish them as members of our community. Even though we are a community of independent seniors, still, we want to make sure our residents enjoy a wonderful, enriched life during this particular chapter of their lives. Everyone on our staff, from housekeepers to senior management, is dedicated to this. And it isn't a culture of tender care more needed now than ever in this world. And it's not just the staff expressing that tender care, it's especially heartwarming to witness the practice of tender care that our residents express in supporting each other. Most of these unselfish acts of kindness. Yes. I need to shout or wait until we can face it. Let me see if it's still on. Okay, I'm gonna just talk really loud. I'm not mad, I'm just talking loud. Custom mic. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, how are we? I'm kind of hoping I could shout, but that's, as I said, it's not just the staff expressing that tender care. It's especially heartwarming to witness the practice of tender care that our residents express in supporting one another. Most of these unselfish acts of kindness and care go unnoticed without a lot of hoopla and celebration, but they do happen daily here. So here's an interesting fact. 21 people moved into the Willows during the COVID shutdown. Many of them took virtual tours of the villas and made their decisions based on that. A common reason for moving here that they shared with us was that they were tired of living surrounded with constant fear in their communities. They felt compelled to move into a Christian Science community, to be surrounded with like-minded neighbors, taking a strong stand against fear, uncertainty, and stress that was so predominant during that time. We interview every resident after they've lived here for 6 months to find out how they're doing and settling in, and to learn about anything we can do to help them. It's quite heartening to hear how joyful they are after they settle in. In those interviews, one thing is clear. What attracted them here is the opportunity to live in a Christian Science community. We know from those interviews and surveys that the main attraction to living at the Willows is location and Christian Science. The last 2 years were indeed challenging. We had to close everything down. We couldn't even eat together in our dining room. I believe what got us through that experience has a lot to do with the tender care that everyone expressed towards each other. Don't we all need that watchful and tender care of which Mrs. Eddy speaks? I'm deeply grateful to be part of a community whose mission is to nurture grace-led community of compassionate and forward-thinking Christian Scientists. On a final note, I recently shared in a town hall meeting that we are the brother birds that soar and sing and on the same branch bend. And yet that branch may have bent quite a bit over the last 2 years, but it didn't break. Thank you. All right, well, we're so delighted to have Dave Cook and Mark Sappenfield with us today. Here's an interesting little factoid, at least I think this is the case. This is the first time a current and former editor of the Christian Science Monitor have been on the stage together. I think that's kind of cool.
Usually we get the former editor off the stage really quickly.
We'll see about that. Well, Dave Cook joined the Christian Science Monitor staff in 1969 and served as the editor of the Monitor from 1994 till 2001. And from 2001 to 2017, Cook also hosted Washington's Newsmaker Breakfast, presiding over 672 of them. Every time I see Dave, I just think about breakfast. It's like, I gotta have breakfast. Those people that he interviewed were Barack Obama, Jimmy Carter. These are samples, of course, of the 672. Barack Obama, Jimmy Carter, Susan Collins, Nancy Pelosi, and Colin Powell. In December of 2017, Dave and his wife, Linda, moved to the Willows, and Dave and his wife are cherished residents here at the Willows. We're just delighted to have them in the community. And I'll just say, this is the last time I'll say this, but we're delighted to have Dave on the board.
We'll heal you of that belief.
Mark Sappenfield joined the Monitor in 1996 and has since written from Boston, the San Francisco Bay Area, the Pentagon, and India, in addition to reporting from Pakistan and Afghanistan during his time in Southeast Asia. Mark has also written on issues of sports and science. After returning to Boston in 2009, Mark served as both Deputy National News Editor and National News Editor. That sounds kind of weird, doesn't it?
There was one first and then the other.
Okay.
And in the right direction.
Yes, exactly.
I got to get off this stage as quickly as I can. They're taking over already. If there's an overarching theme in Dave's discussion with Mark, it's exploring the topic of what it means to be a forward-thinking Christian Scientist. This will lead to many interesting related topics. So now I'll turn the program over to Dave.
So thank you, Todd. Knowing a bit about the demands on Monitor editors, I appreciate Mark's willingness to make time to be here today, especially given the special challenges involved in planning coverage of the war in Ukraine. It also warms my heart to see other members of the Monitor family here, Jane Lamon, who is a resident here, Francine Kiefer, who's our West Coast correspondent, Clara Germani, who's a senior editor, and Marshall Ingerson, Mark's predecessor as editor of the Monitor. Prior to that, Marshall served as managing editor. We love them all. Working with Mark, preparing for this question and answer session, reaffirm my gratitude for what a deeply inspired, metaphysically grounded, journalistically talented editor the Monitor has at this crucial moment. So we're going to take advantage of his Willows visit and ask Mark to cover four main areas today before we go to questions from the audience. And they are how to engage in thinking forward about the Christian Science movement, the Christian Science Monitor, political polarization, and the war in Ukraine. We'll spend 50 minutes or so on those topics, and then we'll turn to audience questions for Mark for 15 or 20 minutes. So Mark, let's start here at home on Willows Drive. As you know, the Willows mission statement is to nurture, you do know, don't you?
I know it.
Yeah,
I've heard
good,
it.
good.
Right here.
I'm so glad to nurture a grace-led community of compassionate and forward-thinking Christian scientists dedicated to boundless spiritual growth and service. So in your view, what does it mean to be a forward thinker? Why is that a good thing?
First of all, I just would like to say that I'm just really grateful to be here today, and I love the topic. So I was invited at the right time. So talking about this is something that really I think is important and is dear to my heart. So I'm just really grateful to be able to be here on this day and share it with you all. So thank you. I think it is, just as you said, Dave, I think it's important to kind of define your terms first. You know, what does it mean to be a forward thinker? I mean, you could think of a lot of things when you think of a forward thinker. And I think it's important for us here to kind of really hone in on what we mean about that. So, you know, one way to start is by saying, okay, who can we think of who's a forward thinker? When you think of a forward thinker, you think of who? You know, and someone who come to mind would be like a Steve Jobs or a Elon Musk, or, you know, someone just from the neighborhood. You could think of someone like Walt Disney. And they say, okay, what made them a forward thinker? And to me, it's two things, and you need to have both or you don't qualify. The first thing is you have to have the imagination, you have to have the ability to think of something different, to think, you know, outside the boxes, the way that you kind of normally put it. Is a forward thinker is someone who opens up new vistas, someone who shows you something that you weren't ever going to see before, whether that is Elon Musk and how he saw electric cars, or whether that's Steve Jobs and how he saw entertainment and computers and things. But the important thing is you can't just kind of be pie in the sky. You've got to have determination. Is that you don't get to really be a forward thinker that anyone knows about unless you have an incredible determination to take that vision and to actually make it a reality. And I was just thinking, I don't know how many of you might have Disney Plus, but since we're right here in the neighborhood, I was thinking about it recently. And there's a program on Disney Plus called The Imagineers, and it's all about how Walt Disney World kind of came to being, and kind of the imaginativeness, if that's a word, of what they did. And what comes through so clearly there when you talk about, really they were talking about the foundation of Disneyland, which was kind of the first thing that Walt Disney did that was like totally outside the book. I mean, obviously he did the animation, but he had this vision for what he thought family entertainment should be. And it didn't really exist. He had to go make it. I mean, that's one of the things you see, is that he wished he could have taken his children somewhere, but it's like, there's nowhere I can take them that I think is the right place to be. So he had this vision. And then you realize that everyone thought he was nuts. You know, it's like all these things that plowing over, buying this land, which out in Anaheim, which was in the middle of nowhere, it was just a bunch of orange groves back then. Who's going to come to this? But he just kept going. And, you know, he came so close to, you know, taking all the money that he'd won and lost it and things like that. And look what happened. You know, that's forward thinking, is you've got to have both of those elements. So let's bring it back a little bit closer to our conversation today. Does that mean we all need to be brilliant? You know, what if I'm not Elon Musk? And that's really, I think that's an important question, because I have to sit in that chair. I mean, you've had to sit in that chair. The monitor needs to grow. The monitor needs to, you know, all the challenges that we face in the Christian Science movement are very much things that the monitor faces too. So it's like, I sit in that chair and I was like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? You know, what if I'm not a forward thinker? What if I'm not a visionary? But I think my comfort in that comes from a line that Mrs. Eddy wrote on page 371 of Science and Health. And she says, this teaching is in advance of the age. That's forward. And that I think it's important to think about it two different ways. Lots of times when we think about forward thinking, we think about time. We think about trying to be the smart person who figures out the next killer app. You know, what is it going to be in 5 years? And I know you probably went through this too. For me, it was what do we do with journalism that's on the internet? It's gone from a print thing to an internet thing to an app. You know, and there can be a tendency to kind of get wrapped up in like, I need to be a fortune teller. I need to be able to look 5 years, 10 years in the future and figure it out. That's one kind of forward thinking. But I think in some ways the more important one is forward thinking in terms of like space, in terms of like forward is over there and I need to take a step toward it. Forward is going directionally towards something. And if you kind of go back and you take all this and you put it together and you say, how is Mrs. Eddy a forward thinker? Well, we know she had the determination. I mean, that's evident in her life. What was the imagination that she had? What was the different thing that she saw? I mean, it's pretty obvious. She saw through the lens of spirit. She took that radical leap, probably as radical as it's taken since Jesus was, which was to say that spirit is real, is present, is practical, that there is no need to go beyond spirit. There is nothing in this existence that I need beyond spirit, which was incredibly radical, remains why we in this room are radical. Forward thinking is nothing but spirituality. That's it. You can't go farther forward than spirit. There's nothing beyond spirit. There's no way you can get more forward thinking than spirit. There is everyone in this room and everyone in the world is moving towards spirit, inevitably, inexorably. There's no other place they can go. They can't decide they're going somewhere else. No, they're going towards spirit. So if we are doing what Mrs. Eddy asked us to do and spiritualizing thought, we are all of a sudden ahead of the curve because we are where everyone is going. And that can be seen as time, the elapsing of time. But I actually think this is important, and this is where that kind of spirituality comes together and makes a point that I think is worth dwelling on a little bit. If you talk to a physicist about the nature of time, time is very clearly an element of the material world. It's space-time. It's an element that they can define as being important to defining where we are in this universe. But they don't know what it is. What makes up time? If I'm figuring out gravity, I can figure out little things that make it up. What makes up time? There's nothing. And the thing that really confuses physicists is they don't understand why time only goes in one direction. Because there's nothing else in the physical universe that just goes in one direction. Everything goes up, down, sideways, backwards, forwards. Why does time just go one direction? And the answer to me is from page, I didn't write down what page it was. I apologize. But Mrs. Eddy says, mind
We're trying to sell Concord here.
Yes. Mind measures time according to the good that is unfolded. That's directional right there. That's only in one direction. According to that definition of time, time can only go one direction. And then we get back to this idea of forward thinking. It all goes towards spirit. So there's no point trying to figure out what the next killer app is. There's no point trying to figure out what's going to happen in 2034, what's going to happen in the next election. No spirit. And you have your way forward.
Thank you. So last summer, you gave a really thought-provoking talk at the Peace Haven Christian Science Nursing Facility in St. Louis. And the subject was, what is the world asking of Christian Science today? It runs 13 pages, single spaced. You'll be grateful to know. I won't try to summarize it here, but the text is on the Peace Haven website, and the whole thing is well worth reading. You quoted Mrs. Eddy's statement in the preface of Science and Health about the need for sturdy pioneers. And you went on to say that early Christian Science workers, sturdy pioneers, were formed in a way that you said was perfectly calibrated for their era. So the question is, what kind of forward thinking is being asked of the Christian Science movement so it is perfectly calibrated for today's needs? And how are those needs different from what the mental landscape of the late 1800s and early 1900s demanded?
One thing I've been thinking a lot about recently in regards to this general question is, what does Christian Science ministry look like today? We knew what it looked like in Jesus' time. We just have to open up New Testament, and that's what ministry looked like in Jesus' time. We know what it looked like in Mrs. Eddy's time. We can, we have all the pioneers of Christian Science, what they did in terms of doing the lectures, in terms of doing, opening up storefronts, all of these things. What does it look like today to have a Christian Science ministry? And I remember I've been kind of flummoxed by this a little bit in the sense of just that question is, what is it that we need to do today? What does it need to look like today? It needs to change. It didn't look the same in Jesus' time as it did in Mrs. Eddy's time. It won't look the same in Mrs. Eddy's time as it will today. Same principle, but it has to be adapted to the needs of the age. And I asked my Christian Science teacher about that, and he told me just a little story about how he went to Bow, New Hampshire, which is where Mrs. Eddy was born. And he said he looked out there and he said he was overwhelmed by the idea that this couldn't have just happened because she was a charismatic person, because she came along at the right time, because she was intelligent, she was a good strategist. There was something divine that had to get that woman from that point to what she did for the world. And you look at what she did, she obeyed. And one of the things that also came to me recently as I was listening, they have the science and health that's just on constant loop that you can listen to. It's a streaming. And sometimes, Mrs. Eddy always liked to say that she would just open up her Bible at random and see where it landed on. Sometimes I just like to do that with the science and health broadcast. I just turn it on, and that's kind of my version of opening up science and health randomly and seeing where it was. And I did that like a week ago while we were kind of planning this event. And I landed in Christian Science versus spiritualism. And there can be a tendency with Christian Science versus spiritualism, or maybe a little bit with animal magnetism unmasked, is to feel like that was of a time. To me, spiritualism is not something that I look at and it's like I feel like everyone's afraid of ghosts today, or they're wondering, how is table tipping happening? Or, but during that, and that's what I realized, during that time, that was a huge thing. It's like people needed to have this put down. There was this false sense of what was driving real spirituality that was being misinterpreted, and she went right for the jugular. And she did it also with animal magnetism, because we think of animal magnetism now in this Christian Science context. Back then it was hypnotism, it was mesmerism, it was all the things that was in the Vaudeville act that they went to go see. And it was a misunderstanding of the nature of spirit. So she went straight at it. And then that's the question that I have is, what do we need to go straight at? Because it's not going to be those things, because society has moved on. And my sense is that, we could all take a pad and paper and we could write down what, I could say, okay, let's write it down. Write down the 5 things that you think we need to deal with most right now, that's most pressing for Christian Science to deal with. And my sense is that we'll have some overlap and we'll have a lot of not overlap. And that's fine, because we have a diversity of gifts, that we were sent here to do different things. We are representing the fullness of God through our combined activities. The point is to do something about it. I love where, and I can't tell you, unfortunately, I can't remember the place in the Bible. I've got it right here, but I can't remember where it says, when it's talking about the Christ, and it says, it's the headstone of the quarter, and on whom it shall fall, it shall ground them to powder. That's what we need to do. We need to grind these beliefs to powder. And that's not just kind of intellectually dealing with them, is we need to, in our hearts, realize that that claim has no reality, whatever it is. And as we do that, then we begin to, as my teacher was saying, then we begin to hear what is that we need to do that. And then how we calibrate it for our age is the result of that work and that obedience. And then you have to follow that obedience to the letter. It might ask you to do some really freaky things, but you got to go do it. I mean, I've often thought that, to spirit, the directions that God gives are very straight and very obvious. To the mortal world, it looks like this, because they have no idea. The mortal world is like, what is that? But to spirit, it makes total sense. So it's about finding those things and really diving into them.
So as you heard earlier today in the annual meeting, the Willows is unveiling a revised vision statement calling for us to be a community of elevated thought, spiritual growth, and unconditional love that blesses the world. So how do we take a broader, forward-thinking view of blessing the world, of spiritual healing?
Yeah, this is one of those things where I don't know if I have the sexiest answer, because I feel like it is, the simplicity.
Monitors editor.
Yes, exactly. Don't do that. Please just be very earnest.
Yes. Right. And unthreatening. Yeah.
Simplicity that is in Christ. I mean, to me, the answer is, I always, when I'm teaching Sunday school, I say no Sunday school answers. And what is the Sunday school answer? God, Jesus, sort of thing. And the reason that they're Sunday school answers is they're always right. You can't say, no, that's not right. It's not Jesus. But that's the thing, is that lots of times when you kind of go back and you read the prayers that Mrs. Eddy often prayed for herself, it's things like, my God is good and good is my God. That's second grade stuff, but she believed it and she ordered her life around it. And so to me, a lot of it is just about doing the things that we know that bring us towards spirituality, and not yielding to the temptations. The temptations are the hard thing, and the temptations are the things that get you going off in lots of different directions. There are two things in particular that, if I was going to kind of come up with my list, I just asked people about, what would your list be? If I was going to come up with my list, these would be two of the ones that I would think about that I think go to that idea of what does the world need from forward-thinking Christian Science today. The first one is medical science. And then the way I mean about that is, once again, I was doing this thing where I just turned on the stream of science and health, and it kept going to fruitage. And I was like, I don't want to listen to fruitage. and for 5 straight days, it just was all fruitage. And then at that point, I was like, okay, God, you really want me to listen to fruitage, don't you? And he did, because what was interesting about that was, if you go through fruitage and you listen to some of the things, certainly not all of them, but if you listen to a lot of the things that people were healed of, and then you say, could medical science heal that today? Could it treat that effectively today? The answer would be yes. I mean, part of the things of Christian Science in Mrs. Eddy's day was that medicine was wholly incompetent. It couldn't do anything. That's not the case anymore in terms of just treatment. Medicine has become much better at treating the body. But if you keep reading those things from fruitage, almost inevitably, you will come to a point where they say, I was healed of this wonderful thing, but, and then the but is, to be honest, that wasn't the healing. To be honest, I am far more grateful for the sense of God and of God's love and of God's care and of God's presence than I was about the healing. You could just tell that at some point, and obviously this was the healing, it tipped over from my body is feeling bad to, oh my gosh, look at the amazingness of spirit, and I am a part of that, and just how wonderful that is. That's not happening anymore with medical treatment. As medicine gets better at healing or at treating certain physical things, you get a healthier body, but you don't get a fed spirit. And that's a huge thing. And when I look out at society today, one of the things that I see as a big issue is mental health. And I see that as being a symptom of the fact that this spiritual feeding is not going on. All you have to do is read the 23rd Psalm. And it's like, is that happening? And I think there's a part of me, and again, this is just my list, so I'm not trying to impose this on anyone, but there's a part of me that wonders, is 20th century Christian Science really about dealing with the physical health, and 21st Christian Science about dealing with mental health? Because I think what's happening is you're getting healthier and healthier bodies, but less healthy minds. And I think one way that Christian Science is needed to heal that. There is no way to heal that but spirit. And I just think that's one way that I'm thinking about it. And the other one is just another thing that I noticed from listening to fruitage is that back then the world was fairly small. People were, I'm writing from Greeley, Colorado, and my entire world is Greeley, Colorado. And you don't really know much about what's going on beyond Greeley, Colorado. And so your Christian Science treatment is really focused on those people around you. But we see every day that is not the world we're in anymore. We are constantly besieged by the claims of the broader world. And I think Christian Science is completely capable of this. I mean, we've seen evidence of it, but I think has to rise to that challenge of dealing with these claims on a much larger level, whether it's climate change or whatever, is that is very present in thought and needs to be healed.
So for those of you keeping track, now we're moving to the monitor. The Willows vision statement calls for blessing the world, and that kind of focus on unselfish blessing is a key part of the Monitor's mission for Mrs. Eddy, who said her newspaper was to injure no man, but to bless all mankind. And as Mark knows, I love what Mrs. Eddy said when the first issue of the Monitor was delivered to her home in Chestnut Hill on the day before Thanksgiving, 1908. The weather was gloomy, and Mrs. Eddy said, "This in truth is the lightest of all days. This is the day when our daily paper goes forth to lighten mankind." Good, I got through it without crying. Lighten, defined as to make less heavy, to lessen the oppressiveness, trouble, or severity of, to relieve cares or woes. So you've written that when it comes to its mission, the Monitor is a peculiar publication. How so?
Well, I like that. I think it's from, what is it, from Peter? It talks about we are a peculiar people. It is unlike any other. I sincerely think it's another publication in the world, and that's good. But I mean, just in the way that you're talking about, the way that sometimes interns will come in and I'll talk about this, and I'm like, "Can you tell why a church founded the Monitor?" I mean, do you have any idea? I mean, it's because you look at like for Christian Scientists, right? Christian Scientist. What is Christian Scientist? No. You know, it's Christian Science Monitor, and it has no home base. You know, we're not like the LA Times or the New York. Lots of papers create their relevance by being around a specific place. What is the point of this thing? A newspaper that is specifically founded for a spiritual purpose in an arena where mortal mind is just going crazy. I mean, the news is arguably where mortal mind is kind of at its most untethered. And you throw something spiritual into that mix, it's going to be different. But it goes back to me, you mentioned one thing. One of my annoying things is I always make the point, at least to me, that the mission of the Monitor is not to spread undivided the science that operates unspent. She says that's the object. Before that, she says, I founded the Monitor to spread undivided the science that operates unspent. The object of the Monitor is to injure no man, but to bless all mankind. And that order is important to me, because if you just injure no man, bless all mankind, you can do that in a secular way. But you have to do the first one first, and then the first one, doing the first, results in the second. It's the subjective and the objective that we know about from those who took Christian Science class. You do the subjective, and the objective comes out of it. And to spread undivided the science that operates unspent is really just to witness God's laws in operation. When Mrs. Eddy says to the science that operates unspent, science is laws of God, she is throwing down the gauntlet. She is saying, I see the laws of God operating everywhere. Do you? And she founded the Monitor to put her money where her mouth is, quite literally. Yeah. But I mean, that's what she's done. Is she said, you have to look at this. And so to me, you know, we've talked about this. In some ways, it's hard to define what the Monitor is. And Marshall, who was back there, who was the editor before me, did this really revolutionary thing in trying to get us along that path. But ultimately, to me, what I feel is that when someone reads the Monitor, they should know what God feels like.
I love that.
It doesn't mean that they're going to get it. It doesn't mean that they're converted. It doesn't. But it's some David Grant, who you worked with before. He often called it like it's a John the Baptist function. It prepares the way. And I mean, to me, that's what makes the Monitor different. Is it's not to do anything other than do that spiritual work.
And I should note that David Grant, who he referred to, was a tremendously bright young, not Christian scientist.
Yes.
Who got it. It was watching him get it was a wonderful thing.
And it's just an example of that. He wasn't
Yes.
a Christian Scientist.
Yep.
We weren't converting him, but he got it. He understood that point.
All those Monitor breakfasts, I got them with a sausage, Mark. As editor of the Monitor, you have a key role in helping move it toward greater financial health. And one aspect of that is encouraging philanthropy. Recently, the Monitor received a very generous one-time gift, which meant for the first time in decades, the mother church did not have to use its funds to cover the monitor's operating deficit. The Willows is also looking for ways to help build a stronger financial position, growing its endowment. So could you share how you pray about financial support for worthy activities?
In some ways, I feel like, when I took this job, I talked to my teacher too, and he just said, you're blessed when you're doing manual-based activities. And he saw this as being a manual-based activity. And I'm kind of answering the question in that way because I feel like I have been blessed in thinking about this by working for the Monitor. I think working as the Monitor's editor has shaped my thinking about this to a significant degree. And one of the things that's really become clear to me as I can't remember when it was, but at some point on my Monitor journey, is it occurred to me, and again, this is just my thought, but just sharing it for what it's worth, that Mrs. Eddy created a church that could not succeed except by spiritual means. And what I mean by that is, obviously, one of the most obvious examples, I guess the one I've wrestled with the most, is the Christian Science Monitor, obviously. And as you know, when Mrs. Eddy founded the Monitor, there was this question of, should it be Christian Science Monitor? Should it be something else? And this is still the same thing. We've brought in consultants, and the first thing they always say is, drop the Christian Science. Thank you. That's, here's your money.
Yeah.
But I think it's a protection. Because the tendency to want to be profitable can be really strong. And if we didn't have that name attached to it, there might be a tendency to say, well, what can we go do? We could do this, we could do this, we could do this. But when you got Christian Science on there's only so far you can go. And I think that's Mrs. Eddy saying, nope, you've got to do the work spiritually. And when you do the work spiritually, you'll get your reward. And I think we can look at the Bible, and there's countless stories of when you do the work, you get the reward. The widow woman or the servant worthy of his hire. You can just go down the list. And to me, what that has said is that when talk turns to budgets and things like that, I think that there needs to be a demonstration of it. I think it's wrong if we don't see progress. But on some level, I turn off a little bit during that conversation and I say, what is it that we need to be doing? And then because I feel like unless we're doing that, every other conversation is a little bit pointless. So to me, it would be kind of like, and we talk about this all the time, it would be kind of like, you break your leg, so you sit there and you go, my leg is perfect, my leg is perfect, my leg is perfect, and it's like, that's not it. So, you can't do the same thing with the Monitor. You say, the Monitor is perfect, the Monitor is perfect. No, go do the work, And so, to me, that's the answer.
There's a great story in Monitor history, which is the first editor of the Monitor, Archibald McClellan, who was a member of the board of directors and had worked with Mrs. Eddy on many things, went to her just before the Monitor came out and said, Mrs. Eddy, I think we should take the name off. And her response to him was, God gave me the name and it remains. So pretty much settled that.
Here's the question. How many times do you think Mrs. Eddy would have fired you? Yeah. One thing I've always thought about. It's like, there's times I've gone in, I was like, oh my God, I would be so toast if she was so wrong right now.
Have you enjoyed your 15 minutes as editor of the Monitor, Mr. Cook? Continuing on the Monitor, some readers are happy with what they see in the Monitor and support it generously. But as editor, you also get to hear from sometimes angry readers about the Monitor's faults, real or perceived. Can you talk about your view of a healthy relationship between readers and the Monitor?
I don't think the Monitor has a unique dynamic in that it obviously has the church element behind it. So, there is the element, which is you will get, I was joking about it, but you will get the you are ruining Mrs. Eddy's paper.
Right. Since you are the Antichrist.
Yes. But I think, as a mental thing, this is not unique to the Monitor. This is what's going on all throughout. And what I would say is that there is a tendency. Here's another one of those things. I was saying if we were coming up with our list of things, one of the ones I would come up with would be deification of self. That would be one of the things that I would say, the Christian Scientists, we really need to work on ourselves and and the claim of that. And I do feel like that's pretty present in journalism today. Is in some ways there's a good thing about it. You know, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, journalism was very corporate. And it's like, I remember in my first journalism class, you know, this was Journalism 101 in college. Sit down, here's this guy who used to be an editor at the Washington Post. You know, he's doing his thing, he's walking up and down the aisle and trying to look very impressive. And I forget exactly what he said, but he said something to the effect of, you are the gatekeepers. It is not news until you decide it is news. Well, that is not true anymore. No. You know, during the time, that was in 1992, and that was at the very tail end before the internet changed everything. But I mean, it was very much like, we decided what was news and you guys just had to suck it up, sort of thing. And it's good that that's not that way anymore. There needs to be a permeability. There needs to be a relationship there. So it's not just right that, you know, you just take whatever we send you. But it's kind of that dynamic has now flipped. And now it's basically, we're just chasing around, like, say, is this news? Is this news? Is this what you want? Is this what you want? And in a lot of ways, I felt like, and I think I've told this to you, I felt like as editor of the Monitor, I feel like I have my feet on two ice floes and they're just slowly moving farther apart. And you know, at some point, the Monitor just needs to say, this is who we are, and this is what we believe. But I think that can be a tough thing in journalism today, because there are so many media outlets, both, you know, legitimate and illegitimate, that will tell you what you want to hear, that then it becomes that you don't want to hear what you don't want to hear. And I mean, I think of a marriage. You know, is it a healthy marriage if one spouse is just telling the other spouse what they want to hear?
I'm not going to answer that question. Self-preservation. Self-preservation.
I would say no. So the point is that you have to be willing to be challenged. And that goes both ways. The Monitor has to be willing to be challenged too. And that's, you talked about, did you say a relationship when you were talking? That's a relationship. And that we didn't have that in the 60s, 70s, 80s and things. And now, but it's flipped the other direction now. And it's like, now we're going hat in hand saying, will you please read this article? You know, and it's like, it has to be something in between where you listen to them and they listen to you. And from that comes the journalism. But one point I would make that I think is also really important is that people have to want nuance. And if you were in the Monitor right now, people would be rolling their eyes, because nuance, I use nuance like every third sentence. It's like we have to make nuance interesting, because if you are not nuanced, you are wrong. If you are getting an article, if you're reading an article, if you are hearing something, if you're watching something and it is not nuanced, it is incomplete. I guess I shouldn't say wrong, it is incomplete. And you are getting a view that is either incomplete or is pandering to you because it knows that you want it. And part of that relationship has to be, one, you have to want to be challenged both ways. And also you have to be willing for things not to be made simplistic. And I know we're a little bit long, but I do want to share this. It was very interesting. What this really came home for me was when I was reporting in Afghanistan, and I was interviewing a tribal chief there. And this tribal chief was someone who was against the Taliban. And I was in Afghanistan, and this was like 2007. So this was at the height of the Afghanistan war. And so this tribal chief was against the Taliban. And so that was a good thing, you know, that, hey, we should ally with him. So I went to go and talk with him. Why are you against the Taliban? And things like that. And of course, as with all things, you know, you don't get the question, you don't get the answer you're expecting. He kind of looked at me, and there's this very kind of—
Unless it's annual meeting at the mother church, but go ahead.
There can be this very Afghan way of looking at, you know, like, I don't know if any of you saw that picture from National Geographic with the woman, the kind of green-eyed woman. That is a very Afghan look. They will look into your soul. So this man, he leans forward and he said, let me tell you what the truth is. And then, you know, the truth is coming and there is no way to go against this. And he says, you Americans have created the Taliban. And so I am, you know, at this point, I'm like, I don't know where to go with this. So I just am like, so tell me why you think that. And this, he says, he holds his hand up into the air and he goes, you can read a license plate from space and you are telling me you can't kill this Talib? And for this guy, who lives in this community, the Taliban are probably the dropout guy who couldn't do anything with his life, so he went and joined the Taliban. You know, he knows who the Taliban are. It's just Johnny down the street who just got stoned every weekend and couldn't make anything out of his life, so he went and joined the Taliban. And so he's like, you're the biggest army in the world. You can't kill that guy? I can kill that guy. It's easy to kill that guy. He had no nuance. He did not understand the shades of gray that were present, why we can't identify that guy, why there are different tribal relations in Afghanistan, why we don't have the intel in the area. He couldn't see any of that. And so he made it simplistic. If I don't understand why you can't do this, so you must have created it. There's so much of that going on right now, of people not wanting to wrestle with the shades of gray, so they make it simplistic.
Which brings us, those who are following the program, to political polarization. An analysis last month by the nonpartisan Pew Research Center found congressional Democrats and Republicans are further apart ideologically today than at any time in the past 50 years. Democrats on average have become somewhat more liberal, while Republicans on average have become much more conservative, Pew says. You can also see polarization in how people view the news media. In a survey last year, Pew Research Center found that while nearly 80% of Democrats and Democrat-leaning independents have at least some trust in the information which comes from the national news media, only 35% of Republicans and Republican leaners have a similar degree of trust. So let's start close to home for the two of us. Is the news business broken?
And as I've been thinking about that, it's a chicken and egg thing. I would say, in more of a way, I would say society is broken, and the news media is representing that. Because in our society, news media is capitalistic. It has to find readers. It's not state funded. So news needs to go, and again, this is the advantage of the Monitor, is we don't have the profit motive, so we can try and stay with what we want. But
healing of that.
Yes,
yeah.
But everyone else has to go find a reader, and if the reader wants it in a certain way, you kind of need to do that, or else you don't have any more readers and you go out of business. And for me, it's this broader. Mrs. Eddy often talks about the idea of an atmosphere of thought. She says, don't go into a place, she was talking about a negative atmosphere. Don't go in there unless you're going to cure it. But the atmosphere of thought right now, and polarized is the word, the atmosphere of thought is very polarized. It is pulled to extremes. You necessarily have to get drawn to one of the two extremes, because otherwise you're illegitimate.
My favorite Sappenfield quote on that is, the mental atmosphere is a ball of spikes.
Yes, it is. That's where we are. And it's injurious, it's violent, and you kind of have to go there. And what I would say, in kind of thinking about what that means for the news media, is that phenomenon in political science is known as negative partisanship. And we've talked about it in a couple different Monitor cover stories recently. Negative partisanship means I fear and hate the other guy more than I like my guy. So your partisanship is negative. You are not positive for your side. You are strongly against the other side. It means the other thing. It means you vote for your person, but it means the other thing. Trust is impossible in that scenario, because it kind of is I keep trying to come up with the right phrase for this. Fool's gold is not strong enough. But what it promises is that I have my side that makes me comfortable. And the most obvious example of this is MSNBC and Fox News. Is you get one side that makes you comfortable and one side that makes you nuts. But the good thing is I get my side. At least I have my side. So I'm just going to wrap myself in the blanket of that side, and that's good. The problem is you hate half the world. You can't have trust in that scenario.
Let me move you to a sort of a different way of looking at, which is how does the Monitor and how should Christian Scientists deal with or pray about the challenge of political polarization and take a more inspired view of government?
Actually, as I was thinking about it, I'm glad that we got here with polarization. I would say that, to me, and I've said a lot of this today, but to me, this is the most important question for Christian Scientists today. It's just my sense.
Polarization in general, political polarization?
Polarization and mental polarization. And I wrote down some thoughts about this, so I might refer to my notes a little bit more than I have, just because I think it's important for me to kind of say this right. But what did Jesus' government do to him? It tortured him until he was dead, materially. That is what Jesus' government did to him. When Jesus was brought before his government, what did he say to it? He said, you could do nothing at all to me unless it was given unto my Father. That's a pretty amazing view of government. But he's the exemplar. What is our view of government? At some point, it comes down to the question of, do we believe in spirit or don't we? And government is one of the most aggressive temptations to disbelieve in spirit. And I understand it. I mean, because government can do awful things, can do great things too. But we have an example where the person after whom our religion is named took a certain point toward government. And let's be clear, government tried to tempt him a lot. You go to the wilderness, bow down in front of me and worship me, and I will give you all the kingdoms of the world. No. Sadducees and Pharisees, they just kept going. I did some research at one point, and basically Sadducees and Pharisees are two political parties. I didn't realize that, but they were. Back during that time, there were two political parties in the Jewish state. The Jewish state was a religious state, and essentially their parties were Sadducees and Pharisees. And they had two different views, and it's actually amazing how similar it is. One had their power in like the rural areas and among people who wanted to return to old things, and the other were much more cosmopolitan and in the city. It's amazing. And if you read the Bible, if you read the New Testament in that, you'll realize they are all trying to get a piece of Jesus. They're all trying to get him to side with them so that he can bring his, it's like trying to do an election. It's like, if I can get Jesus supporters, but seriously, and he would not take it. He refused to be drawn into it. And then of course you have the last temptation, which was the most, which is, you better bow down to me or I'm going to hang you on a tree. And he didn't buy any of it. And so to me, Mrs. Eddy says that poor governments come from a false view of God. She mentioned it specifically in certain parts of the world, but she was mentioning that an unjust government comes from an unjust view of God. What are the qualities that our government is expressing right now? There are some good ones, absolutely, like what we're doing, trying to help with Ukraine and all of those things. But if you're looking at how are we treating each other through government, how are we relating to each other through government, just go down and read Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount to me is Jesus' sermon about what government looks like. It's divine government, but that is what government is. And ask yourself, is our government expressing these qualities? We are a democracy. If it is not expressing these qualities, then we better vote for people who make it express those qualities. In the sense that, and not just voting for people, because it's not dependent on that. We need to express those qualities ourselves. And in doing that expression, that is what brings the change. So I got caught for myself in terms of voting. It's not about that. It's about what you express. And to me, you can't polarize spirit. It's impossible. If we are feeling polarized, we have been duped. Because there are no two sides. To have polarization, you must have poles, pole and pole, North Pole, South Pole, left and right. To have polarization, you need to have two. It's not possible in science. It is literally impossible to polarize something that only has one pole. And Mrs. Eddy in Science and Health talks about the pole of spirit that has, interestingly, she says it draws people toward it. It has its own magnetic quality. That's where we need to be. We need to be at the pole of spirit, drawing people toward that pole, not at either end, arguing over this law or this person or that person. And that doesn't mean that advocacy is wrong. It doesn't mean we don't do it. It means we have to know what does the work. The advocacy doesn't do the work. The spirit behind the advocacy does the work.
Just for time reasons, I'm going to
My other answers are much shorter. That was my longest.
That was a good one. They've all been good. And if we could just get off the time-space continuum.
Yes.
We could do it for.
Forward thinking.
That's right. So just briefly, can you talk about your thoughts about how to closer to home, healing divisions within the family of monitor readers?
Well, one of the things that we're working on that we should be seeing soon is how do we impersonalize the news? Because I think a lot of times, these kind of divisions can come from when someone inserts themselves into a story, their own fear, their own thoughts. How do we lift, just like with a healing, you have to impersonalize the case. You don't say, oh my gosh, it's so terrible that this person has this problem. If you impersonalize it. And I think one ways that we can impersonalize is by lifting, one of the ways that we've talked about it is through fairness and values. Can we find some sense of fairness that kind of gets ourselves out of the equation and allows us to look at these things in a more impersonal way? And then the other way is just news is all about values that are being expressed. When you go down to the level of all levels of news, it's about some value that's going on. It's about courage, or it's about fairness, or it's about responsibility, or it's about honesty. Ultimately, all the news, you can distill it down to some base level of fairness. And I think if you go to there, you can have a much freer conversation about that than you do if you're just up here talking about the actual news event. I think that's one way to kind of deepen the news. There's a Mrs. Eddy I've always loved. She says, to strike out right and left against the mist does nothing to clear the vision, but to rise above it is sovereign panacea. And I love that it's right and left. If you're on the axis of right and left, you're in the mist. You've got to rise above it. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And then I think it just has to be a personal thing. I mean, I think I need to begin by challenging myself to get all these things out of myself, because I don't think the benefit can be divorced from that. Mrs. Eddy also says, to live so as to be in constant relation to God is to individualize infinite power, or something like that. And that's it. I mean, she's basically saying, if you do your job, you've got infinite power. So that means you got to turn the lens back on yourself.
Again, we had promised that we would talk about Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. So that's what we're going to do right now. What do you see as the Monitor's unique contribution to coverage of Russia's war against Ukraine?
And this is the point where I would say, if you can just go back to our event that we had on Thursday,
yes,
that probably will answer this question way better than we can here. We had for those who didn't know, there was a webinar that we did with our managing editor, Amelia Newcomb, and then two of our writers who have been in Ukraine since the war began, Scott Peterson and Martin Kuz. And they were just phenomenal. So that, if you watch that, you will get the answer to this question.
In other words, is it available?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. But basically the answer to me is, what do you bring in with you? Is that when you go, you have to report on what you see, but you also, if you bring your fears with you, if you bring if you bring those things with you, you're going to see through that lens. You're going to see through that lens of fear. They went in looking for sparks of hope, sparks of humanity, these values that I'm talking about, courage, determination, resilience. They went in looking for those things, and guess what? They're there too. And I think that's one of the things that really distinguishes us.
And in your work planning the Monitor's coverage, how are you praying about the war?
One thing that's come to me as I've prayed about it is that this is a really aggressive case of believing that one man's thought can punish the entire world. No one can really tell you how many people in the Kremlin really are along with Putin, but I think it's pretty clear that Putin has, and one of the things that they said on Thursday is he's made himself coup-proof. But what it means is he's really entrenched himself as the center of Russian politics. And his thought significantly guides what happens. And if you think about it that way, then what you're saying is Putin's thought is really what is behind all the bombs, all the rockets, all the tanks, all the guns. It's just one man's thought. And that's where kind of I go to this idea of, Mrs. Eddy often called Christian Science healing as mind healing. And I tend to think that if she were here, she would say, if everyone in this room could know that mind alone governs, this war could not happen. because it is literally just one person's thought manifesting itself. And there was someone else who mentioned, just in one of the recent Bible lessons that we had with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they made the point that it was Nebuchadnezzar who saw the person that saw the image of Christ in the fire. You know, that's Putin. So we have evidence to suggest that this is not, mind can't be resisted. It's not like mind can go this far, but when it meets Putin, oh my gosh, no, he's too tough. It's like, no, it's like, is mind supreme or not? And it's like, as we know that, I think that's effective prayer. Mrs. Eddy talks about Christian Scientists will hold crime in check. I think that's what she's talking about.
So before we go to questions from the audience, here's one more question from me, moving from issues of war and peace to life in retirement land. There is a line in a classic song, My Way, sung by Frank Sinatra, that goes, "And now the end is here, and so I face the final curtain." What do you see as the implications of thinking forward for those of us who live in a retirement community? And how do we keep from ruminating on the final curtain?
We had an answer that we talked about before, but it was interesting. I was running yesterday. I was jogging, and I don't like jogging, but I do it because I think I should. And I had run a long way, and it's just, you kind of just keep going. You just keep going. It's like, okay, I got to put my foot in front of the other. And then as I got closer, I was like, oh, I'm almost done. It got harder, because it was like, oh, I just kind of make it this final little bit. And I started to pray. I tried to say, think like you're running another 3 miles. Don't think like you've got 300 more feet. Don't think that you've got just keep running. And to me, the way I've always thought about is it's true for every person in this room that your work will continue long beyond the people around you, when the people around you think you are dead. Your work has nothing to do with death. It's not relevant. So why plan around it? And I think retirement in its kind of some of its most tempting forms is to see it as that. It's like, here's my final stage until I'm dead. And that can be I need to enjoy myself and go out and play a lot of golf or something like that, or that can be I'm on the downslope now. It's just going to be things after things going like that. To me, when I think about it spiritually, I imagine Mrs. Eddy talks about different experiences that might happen after death. She talks about a second death. To me, it strikes me as very logical that as we begin to learn the nature of life, that there will be cycles that we go through in terms of our growth, in terms of understanding, applying, and growing. Understanding, applying, and growing. Those are kind of she calls divine cycles of light. I kind of see along those lines. And to me, retirement should just be one of those cycles. Is that, for me, a lot of time when you're talking about someone who's reaching a retirement age, they have just an incredible wealth of experience and accrued knowledge and wisdom. And it's like, what an incredible opportunity to deploy that. And then we go back to circle around to the beginning of the conversation. You say, well, God, how do you want me to deploy that? And retirement can be this incredibly powerful way to have a lot more freedom to just do whatever God asks you to do. For me, it's like, I got to feed the dog. I got to take my kids to soccer practice. I need to, go into work and do all these things that we do. With retirement, in some ways, you've cleared that away and you've created the running room to do whatever God asks you to do. And you've had 60, 70, 80 years of accrued understanding to say, this is how God talks to me. And these are the things I'm good at. These are the gifts that God has given me. To me, it's a launch pad. It's like, how do I start this next phase of life? And there'll be another one after that and another one after that, but death is not a part of it. It's not in the calculation. So it's like, let's just keep going.
Speaking of keeping going, now the audience. Amen. Now it's time for the audience question and answer section of the program. If you're here in Hodges Hall and would like to pose a question of general interest to Mark, please raise your hand and wait to be called on. And for an usher, in this case, it's going to be Doreen Ford, who's a member of our board of directors, to reach your seat with a microphone. When you have the mic in hand, please kindly tell Mark your name, whether you're a Willows resident, and then pose your question. If you're watching the session on Zoom, look for the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Click on the button, write your question. Am I cutting out, or is it just my hearing going? One could be one of either cutting out.
I'm not sure there's anything you can do about it.
Okay.
I got it.
So if you're watching this session on Zoom, look for the question and answer button at the bottom of the screen, click the button, write your question, hit send. And Tom Sebring, the Willows Director of Finance and Administration in the back of the room, will relay questions from the Zoom audience, and Mark will respond to as many questions as possible during the time allotted for that in our program, which is roughly 15 minutes. So, okay. So Saturday afternoon, a couple of Willows residents, much like practitioner friends of Linda's and mine, sent me text messages asking that I pose their question to Mark. So let's start with that one. Could you please ask him a question that would give Mark the opportunity to share his unique spiritual insights into the vastness of his work at the Monitor? Many have read his articles on JSH online. We think it gives a different slant or read and what he brings to the immediate needs of the day. So how do you pray about your work at the Monitor other than constantly?
I think one of the things that's really come to me recently is just taking Mrs. Eddy at her word. You know, every single lesson sermon we read is revolutionary if we actually believe it. You know, I remember, I'm going to get this somewhat wrong, but in one of Mrs. Eddy's biographies, or one of the, you know, Christian Healer or something like that, I'm afraid I can't remember what it is. Someone in one of her classes asked her, is like, why is it that you're able to heal the way that you do? And she says, it's because I believe every word that I say. And that came to me in relation to where Mrs. Eddy says, progress is a law of God. Progress is a law of God. If Mrs. Eddy said it, I have to believe it. If it's a law of God, that means it cannot be broken. That's not the way that divine laws work. Divine laws can't be broken. They're not, you know, like speeding tickets. So I have to then say, everything that is happening in the universe today is evidence of progress occurring. And I can't disagree with it. There's nothing that can happen today that I can look at and say that is not progress. And I think the way that shifted my mind is I think mortal mind will sometimes tempt us into believing that certain conditions are necessary for progress, or we can have retrograde steps. You know, it's like, hey, we progressed here, great, but now we're starting to slide backward or something like that. And I don't think Mrs. Eddy allows us to think that way. And I think in a lot of ways, the Monitor was her statement of defiance against that claim. And when I pray about the Monitor, I pray to say, what do you see, Father? And sometimes that is very clear. I mean, it would be progress that anyone could say would progress. Sometimes you need to think about it because you're like, that, Father, that does not look like progress to me. But I have to believe that there is something there, whether it's the stirring of the muddy riverbed, or whether it's my own personal willful sense is not seeing it as progress because it doesn't fit my narrative. You know, you've really got to, I mean, the word that I love in Science and Health is, I always think Science and Health has a great lead. If you just read Science and Health, it's got a great lead. And right there in there is self-immolation. To me, the two biggest words I really work with are self-immolation and self-justification, as one with the other. I feel like the world is really full of self-justification right now, and what it needs is self-immolation. And so I found it works.
Somebody got their hand up out in the audience. Yes, is that Inga? We're getting a mic to you.
And by saying it works, what I mean is it does, if you yield to it, you do get new inspirations. Not that I'm like some brilliant person, but I mean, it's like you have to commit to it. Yeah.
Hi, Mark. My name is Inga Hardy, and I'm a Willows resident. And I really appreciated so much of what you said about our ways of thinking as an audience. But when I look out at this audience, I see very experienced people, very lifelong learning people. If this audience were filled with 20 and 30-year-olds, would you say anything different to them?
Well, I think 20 and 30-year-olds are just dealing with different, they're in a different mental space than than probably a lot of the people in this audience is. I don't think that, and it's kind of, I guess, practicing what you preach. I don't think the substance or the principle of what I would say would change. I'd probably be talking about different things. Because the claims or the temptations that I see hitting people in, let's just say 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, whatever you want to say, from I'm 40.
This is the Willows, 90, 100. Come to the Willows and live forever.
I'm 47, so use me as a proxy, like my age up. I think my age up is thinking about things and looking at the world very differently from my age down. And so I would probably just, well, for example, I am going to go this summer and do something like this for Newfound and Owatonna, which are Christian Science camps up in Maine. And it will be the same principles, but it won't be this.
Other folks in the audience here? Yes, in the back. I'm sorry, the spotlight are blinding me, so I can't call on you by name. I apologize. Over in the center. Oh, we got one over here. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Bob Dudley. I'm a resident of Willows. And I really appreciate what the monitor is now. When I got out of college and was working in the Chicago area, the monitor was entirely different then. You could walk up to a news rack, which was right alongside the Chicago Tribune, put your money in and get a newspaper. I really appreciated the news back then, and so did my mother. We both subscribed. And I'm wondering whether in your archives, those newspapers back then are available to us if we're interested in the history back then. Thank you.
I'm not sure I even, do you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
so
he knows a lot about this because, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah.
No, I mean, like digitizing the archives happened before my time. I know that we did some of that.
We've had, most of the monitor's archives have been digitized. So if you're a subscriber to the online version of the monitor, you
Or
can,
the weekly.
or the weekly.
Yeah, you can be
Right.
subscribed to either.
And you,
Yeah.
But if you want to see the archive,
You have to go online.
You have to go
but You can
online.
be a weekly subscriber to do it.
yes, go to the website, the little, search thing, carefully hidden. And you can click there and then put in a subject that you want to see. I'm not familiar with a way for the average subscriber to say, I want to see the
Yeah.
monitor newspaper for December 28th, 1946, when Dave Cook was born.
See,
But,
we're gonna, I think that we digitized everything after 1981. I'm not sure we have things digitized that you can reach on the website before 1981, do we? See, what I would suggest is why don't you just come up afterward and give me your email and I'll find out the answer to that. Because I know that I know what Dave is saying with, you can get things after 1981, but what can you get before and how do you get it? I just don't know.
yeah, there's also a commercial access to
vendor.
it through what?
Yep.
ProQuest.
And there's also LexisNexis, you
Yeah,
can get
so
stuff through there.
if you get in touch with us, we can let you know. Then there was a person in the middle there.
Sorry, that wasn't a better answer.
Yes, right back there. Yep.
Hi, there's an article, there's a book.
Your name is?
Jeannie
Thank you.
McCluskey, will that do it?
Thank you. That would be wonderful.
And I belong here. There's a book called Mary Baker Eddy in Her Own Words. It is remarkable. I own it. There's probably one at the study center. I've been giving them away and I have to stop giving them away. But they're really wonderful, so I recommend it to everybody.
Thank you.
Over here. Question over here.
Mark Strickland, and I'm not a resident. I asked Mark, I asked you a question on a Zoom meeting about a year ago, and you gave a very insightful answer, and just kind of just have a follow-up on the same concept. So my question was, what percentage of the Monitor staff were Christian Scientists. And the reason I asked that is because I was on a year, kind of my own little goal to really learn to love the Monitor. And I was always having a challenge with it because I would read articles and I would just go, a Christian Scientist could not possibly have written this article. And so your answer was that, let me tell you a story. And if you recall, you mentioned that 25 or so years ago, a lecturer, I forget his name at the moment, gave a lecture on the floor of the Monitor, and
Yes.
it was very well
In the 80s,
received.
I think it was.
Yeah. And you said it was very well received in the 80s. And but that your next comment was that could not happen today. And it kind of came around to about 15 or 20% of the staff are active working
More than
Christian
that.
Scientists.
So the
And-
question is,
So the question is, at the time, you kind of agreed that, yeah, that's one of my jobs would be to, see if we can improve that. And I wondered, is that still a thought? Where is it at? What's being done, or if anything, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of take that question in a broad sense, I think there needs to be a critical mass of Christian Scientists at the Christian Science Monitor. You cannot have the Christian Science Monitor without Christian Scientists, both in significant numbers and in positions of leadership. And see, I could probably answer this question for a half an hour. So I'm trying to think about how do I distill it down. Currently, like for example, recently I think this is okay for me to say, we posted 5 different positions.
and if not, you'll find out.
Yes, I will be the ex-editor of the
Yeah,
Christian Science
that's right.
Monitor.
Come join the club. Marcia and I will welcome you.
Yes. We posted for 5 different positions and got more than 150 responses, of which 3 were Christian Scientists. And only one of them was a credible journalist. The other 2 had never had any journalism experience whatsoever. And so we hired the one. What we have found is that we are probably not going to have a Christian Science future if we don't make them. We have to bring in young people, get them excited about the Christian Science Monitor, and basically train them up from like college age, because there just are not many or any mid-career Christian Science journalists out there. So we're doing that. And I think that's really important to try and build that up. One thing I would say is that, and this is really kind of something that's hit me since we talked, is I've come to appreciate the wide spectrum of thought within Christian Science. I used to kind of think, I'm a Christian Scientist. I think I'm a pretty good Christian Scientist. So Christian Scientists must think like me. I have found that it's not the case at all. You can get 2 people. Let's just take, for example, masks, mandates, or vaccinations. You can have 2 people who are excellent Christian Scientists, who are going to church every Sunday, and who are having healings, who have 2 completely different positions on that. And so I would step back a little and have a Christian Science couldn't possibly write that. I actually find lots of Christian Scientists do write that. To me, the line is not, it's interesting, the line is not so much who's a card-carrying member. What we've talked about, and I've talked about this at different levels of the church, the line is who has spiritual sense. Who is bringing their highest sense of spiritual sense to that? And I would say we have people who are Christian Scientists and non-Christian Scientists who do that. And obviously, you're absolutely right. For something like the pandemic, there's some more coaching that we need to do with the non-Christian Scientists, because sometimes they will say things where, you're right, we just shouldn't go there. And I think during the pandemic, we've had, I was joking with Dave, there was one of the times during the pandemic where we wrote a story and I was like, okay, Mrs. Eddy would have just fired me for that one. Because this does happen, and I'm not trying to make light of it. I'm trying to say this is something we need to work on. But my sense is that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. We need to grow Christian Scientists within the Monitor. Specifically also because a lot of the Christian Scientists we have at the Monitor are in the late 50s, early 60s. So we could lose a lot of them in the next 5 years because of retirement. So we need to build up kind of who's our roster. And we just also need to build them in general. Currently, I would say we're less than half active Christian Scientists. And I do not want to set a quota on that, but I think it needs to be bigger than that. But I think we also need to appreciate that there are non-Christian scientists who very much, the person we mentioned earlier, who very much understand the mission and bring a lot of blessing to the Monitor. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about that.
And so he won't blow his own horn, but I will. So every day, either Mark or Amelia Newcomb, the managing editor, write a letter or an email to the staff going through all the stories in the online edition, talking using terminology that Marshall Ingerson developed for how is it a Monitor story? How is it a story meeting Monitor goals? So in my experience of the Monitor, which goes back a while, there has never been a time when the Monitor staff has gotten more consistent daily instruction and review on whether we're meeting our goals. That's one thing I would say. And the other thing I would say is just to echo what Mark has said. A number of the non-scientists on the staff have given just remarkable service and are the people who, we send into war zones. And anyway, they love it in their own way as much as we do. Now, Tom, you've got one from Zoom and then we're going to close. What's the Zoom question?
The question from one of our viewers online is, I and many of my conservative Christian Science friends have become very discouraged with openly pro-liberal and anti-Trump political coverage in the Monitor. Not only that, but we've seen an apprehension to cover explosive facts like the release of the Hunter Biden laptop 2 months before the 2000 election, which clearly revealed VP Biden accepting bribery for government favors. But the Monitor hid these acts from their readership and helped elect Biden. What happened to objectivity?
I think,
And
and
how do you
that's a fair
stop beating
question.
your wife? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think it's a fair question. I mean, because it's like, again, if we're not open to these questions, then we're not, then we're hypocrites. Then we're saying, hey, we're fair, but we're only fair to people who believe in us, who agree with us. I think, and I would go back a little bit to the answer to the question that I gave about the issues that we're facing in journalism today. I'm looking at you, even you didn't ask the question. Sorry, I'll look out at wherever the camera is. I'll look toward the camera. I would say that I mentioned that there's a mental atmosphere of division in which there's a tendency to delegitimize the other side. And I would say that mental atmosphere is something that the Monitor has to struggle with too. In a perfect world, if we're all doing our work, then hopefully the Monitor is protected and kind of insulated from that. But all these trends, the Monitor struggles with these things too, the polarization. So that's a way of saying that I'm not, I can't say that we always get it right, but what I would say is that a lot of the things that I see being suggested, like, for example, the Hunter Biden report sort of thing, they're just, to me, not, and here we're just going to go into a situation where, kind of like Abraham and Lot, you might just agree to disagree sort of thing, but we can do that amicably. I don't see the rigor of reporting behind those things. They say it was very clearly said. I don't buy that. There are just some things where I feel like the media is, and this happens on the left too. You brought up an example on the right, but it happens on the left too. The word that often comes up is there can be polarized orthodoxies in which this is what it is, and you can't, if you say anything else than this, you are kowtowing or you are illegitimate or something like that. And I would like the Monitor to stay free of these orthodoxies. And a lot of kind of what I heard in that question, I would just gently push back and say, I'm not sure there's the journalistic rigor behind those reports that you think there is. And the monitor needs to have that journalistic rigor. And we shouldn't pull any punches. We shouldn't take one side. And as I said, I would never say that we get it right every time, but I can stand on this stage very, very comfortably and stand behind our decisions on what we did around those reports. Because that's when you get into the idea of you're doing something for an audience. An audience wants to hear these things, so you offer it to them. And I think the monitor just has to, as best we can, stand back from that and try and make the best decisions we can based on the reporting that we're doing.
When a reporter tells you it's the last question, they're always lying. So I'm going to do one more question and then we will stop. And another question sent by Willows residents on Saturday mentioned the Zoom Community Connect event about Ukraine that you guys did on Thursday. That the monitor hosted for subscribers, hint, hint. And this person asked, what is the wisdom behind exposing or more advertising that we're using WhatsApp to communicate in the war zone and journalists going unprepared without body armor? So can you talk about what steps the monitor is taking to ensure the safety of today's war correspondents like Scott Peterson and Martin Kuz in Ukraine and Fred Weir in Moscow, and how can readers contribute to that effort metaphysically?
Yeah, and again, I think
Are they still getting security training?
Oh yeah, you can't go into a war zone without
And they're still
security
going in
training.
with flak jackets.
As far as I know, I mean, that's probably their decision, but I mean, I see why they wouldn't. I mean, I know, for example, when Scott Peterson went in, he came out with like 60 pounds of gear. So, I mean, he's a photographer, so that's a lot of photographic gear.
Right.
Also others. I think it comes down, in this case, it has come down to the two people that we sent to Ukraine, Martin Kuz and Scott Peterson, are very experienced war correspondents. Martin Kuz embedded with the American military for many different times when he was covering Afghanistan. And so he just knows how to do this. Scott Peterson is probably one of the more experienced war correspondents on the face of the earth today. He covered Rwanda in like 1994. So I mean, he's been doing this for 30 years. He just knows what he's doing. And I think what you do is, one is you only send people there who know what they're doing. Two, you underline, underscore, boldface, highlight, no story is worth being captured, your life, these sorts of things. Martin Kuz, in the event that we were talking about the other day, he said, you can't file if you're dead. And he says he's being joking, but he reminds himself of that sometime, which is this, my job is to file a story. I can't do that if I take risks. And then the last thing is just to stay in constant contact with them. And that's what you talk about, the WhatsApp thing, is that we've been able to stay in touch with our people in Ukraine because the cellular networks weren't taken down. We were able to actually pinpoint where they were at any given moment, because on WhatsApp, you can actually track where they are. So, I mean, there was one time when one of our editors was like talking to Scott Peterson and was like, if the Russians attack this way, then you can get out the bridge going this way. And it's like that level of detail is what you can do these days. So it's a combination of all those
And
things.
I assume you and probably the directors are all praying about it too.
Of course, yeah.
So our thanks to Mark Sappenfield for taking time out of his very busy schedule to be with us today, for his inspiring remarks, and for leading the monitor in such an impressive way during this challenging time. If you want to see a replay of today's interview, it'll be available under the events tab on the Willows website. Time in now, as I say it, www.willowscommunity.org. And now let me turn the program back to Rich Clark, the chair of the Willows Board of Directors.
Thank you both. That was just outstanding. Can we just give them one more great applause? That was just terrific. Thank you both. Two announcements before we close. Todd mentioned it. I guess it's worth mentioning again. There are refreshments back there on the patio behind the garden center. And also, please stop by the new study center there, 394. It is really quite a place. It's worth a little trip. So let me just close with the sixth tenet, okay? And we solemnly promise to watch and pray for that mind to be in us, which was also in Christ Jesus, to do unto others as we would have them do unto us, and to be merciful, just, and pure. Thank you all so much for coming.